Thank you guys so much for coming tonight especially, and I'm really serious because I am getting ready to take this show on the road, and as excited as I am about that, I am ready to practice this over and over again, and so the evaluation forms I gave you are going to be so helpful to me. Thank you. And anything you think of when we get to the end, we'll try and have a real Q&A, so if there are genuine things that you want to ask, let me know, and otherwise the evaluation forms. So I'm here today to share with you one of the most exciting medical discoveries of our lifetime. And it's leading modern medical science to proving so many theories from the most ancient medical sciences. My expertise as an integrative healthcare practitioner and educator is to focus on this leap in understanding and provide you opportunities to integrate the best of ancient and modern medicine. This integration is going to benefit your health and the health of future generations. So my goal for you today is that you leave here with the knowledge and desire to spread awareness of this amazing system. And that's why I'm here. So I would love to know if anybody would like to share what brought you here today, aside from being my beloved family and friends. Are there things that you are curious about and interested in that brought you here? Anybody? No? Okay. Well, so with that in mind, the curiosities that bring all of us together in this are amazing. I love having healthcare practitioners, students, patients. Every type of person is going to benefit from this talk today. And you can always connect with me afterwards and through my website if you have questions that we aren't able to answer either in our talk or the Q&A afterwards. Okay, so who's ready to take a journey with me?
Ready. Yeah.
Awesome. It's going to be like traveling with Doctor Who through time and helping us collectively solve some of the greatest mysteries of our lifetime. Here we go. So to start this journey, I want to share a little glimpse into my personal story because it directly correlates with the discoveries that have been made in the last 30 years and what brought me here today. These images evoke a lot of memories for me of the biggest challenges in my life. I've had diagnosis of scoliosis. This is someone having a metal rod put in their spine. I had very severe rheumatoid arthritis and a diagnosis of manic depression, among other diagnoses and traumas, all of which included recommendations that would have led to a life of surgeries and on pharmaceuticals. And none of these diagnoses included suggestions for changes to my diet, much less any natural medicine. And to be honest, my future looked really bleak. A lifetime either of surgeries or possibly in a wheelchair. And this really gets hard for me, but also because as a practitioner and a doctor, I see this story unfold with so many of my patients. Who here has had some type of health issue that you weren't sure if you were ever going to really recover from? Right? It's really, really rough. And yet, I'm here today because of what I learned as I faced those kind of situations and getting to share with you all, knowing probably more than half of you have had different but similar experiences. So, I learned about the medicines that I needed to heal, including one particular plant. Modern science at the same time was also discovering the medicinal values of this plant, and through studying this plant, scientists found a self-healing system that we had not yet seen in our bodies. So what is this system? How does it work? Let's start with learning some of the newest scientific terminology. That's always the fun part, all the big medical words. And then we're going to cruise back in time and see how we ended up with not only the crazy name of this system, but all of the information we now know about it. So let's see. Who here has ever heard of the endocannabinoid system? All right, that's about half of our audience. That's amazing. Literally a few years ago as I gave this talk, there were 1 or 2 people in the audience. So it's growing. But who has never heard of the endocannabinoid system? All right, and here's the acronym that I'm going to try and use, ECS. All right, does anybody want to attempt a definition of the endocannabinoid system right now? I would love it, Leah.
The receptors in the body that receive the medicine?
So the receptors, that is a big part of the endocannabinoid system. And there's more, right? Okay, so yeah, so let's break this down. And the first part of we're going to just break down the word, and that'll help us get towards a definition. Endocannabinoid, endo. What does endo mean? It's short for something. Endogenous. So the endocannabinoid system is inside of us. It's endogenous. And then the word cannabinoid. This refers to a system of receptors, as Leah pointed out, and substances that stimulate these receptors. They're located all throughout our body. They're in many different types of cells. And this endogenous system of receptors and substances is a messaging network. It acts like a motherboard in our bodies. It has the objective of creating homeostasis with the other major systems in our body. That's a big deal. Homeostasis with all of the other systems in our body. So it's in charge of our whole body's ability to maintain stability despite internal or external conditions. That's what homeostasis means, right? No matter what's going on inside of us or outside of us, this system is helping us try and find balance with all of our major systems. So one of my main missions in life is to help you regulate your motherboard, basically, and the motherboard of your patients and students. So even with just this basic understanding and definition that I just gave you, can you start seeing why this is truly a holistic system? Yeah? The ECS is in charge of regulating most, if not all, of our other physiological systems. So understanding how to work with this network ultimately connects us to unlimited healing possibilities. And science is now backing up these huge statements I'm saying, and we're going to talk a little bit about that so you can walk away from here today with a lot of knowledge about how important it is as soon as possible for everybody in every audience to raise their hands when I say, who has heard of the endocannabinoid system? So right now I'm going to ask another question. How many people want to take a guess as to how many systems make up the human body? What did you learn in biology? Or what would your doctor say if I said, how many systems are there? Go ahead, Andrew.
5.
5 systems. Ooh, anybody else have a guess?
2.
2? Come on, I'm not even given that one.
8.
8, right? Okay, so we're getting there. When I was growing up and in high school in AP biology, they taught us there were 7 major systems that made up the whole human body. And now they're teaching that there are 11. And we won't go into detail about those. You can research that and Google that. I have a few of the main ones up here, not all of them. But the important thing that I'm here to tell you is that the ECS is not being considered one of them yet. And it should be, right? We're talking about things like the skeletal system, the nervous system, the reproductive system. All of these things make us up. Well, this is now a system that regulates all of those other systems. Don't you think they should maybe be counting it as one of our major systems? But no one is. And it could be considered the most important physiological system involved in establishing and maintaining health. And just because we didn't see it doesn't mean it didn't exist, right? It's been around for a very long time. Does anybody know what this creature is? It's called a sea squirt. And sea squirts evolved over 600 million years ago. They still exist, and they have ECS receptors. In fact, almost every vertebrate and invertebrate that they have studied, they have found ECS receptors in. Insects, in fact, are the only species that they have not yet found cannabinoid receptors in. So all of these little cuties have an endocannabinoid system. And this is a good time, while you can stare at cute, sweet animals, for me to make a few really important points. This self-regulating system has been functional in most species for a very long time. We just established that. And other than the fact that And other than a few select species, cannabis has not been used to regulate this system. I don't think, for example, that baby duck is using cannabis to be healthy, right? Regardless, Chinese medicine has been diagnosing and treating things now associated with this system for thousands of years, both with and without cannabis. It's very important, therefore, for us to understand this system with regards to and regardless of cannabis. So, I want to cover the basics of the endogenous holistic system first. And as Leah pointed out, a big part of this system are the receptors. The ECS receptors are designed to be extremely sensitive to both the big words endogenous and exogenous stimulations, right? Things inside us affect it, things all around us are affecting it all the time. And we've only just begun to learn how to find these receptors, much less measure and modulate their functionality in each individual. Of course, this is what most of the research is about right now, looking at these receptors and how to affect them to ultimately create and help maintain homeostasis. We now know, for example, one of the things that we understand is that how proliferate the system is in our bodies. The total number of receptors in the body is believed to be greater than all other receptors in the body combined. One substance in particular, a cannabinoid, alone has more receptors in our brain than any other substance. Endorphins, serotonin, dopamine, oxytocin, any type of thing that you might think of as stimulating our body. There are more receptors just for one cannabinoid in our brain than all of those things combined. And there are multiple types of receptors within the system, so let's look at those. There are two main types of receptors. The CB1 receptors, CB is short for cannabinoid, are mostly located in the brain and are regulating neurological function. And then the CB2 receptors are mostly located in the gut and are responsible for our immunological functioning. There are more than 2 receptor types, but these are the 2 main ones, and scientists are still discovering and understanding the different functions and roles of these receptors and how the various substances influence them. So many tissues contain more than one type of receptor, like the liver here you see has both CB1 and CB2 receptors. And that actually starts telling us a lot about that organ's functions in our body as well, neurological and immunological, for example. But then you see the brain, or we look down deep into the muscle tissues or deep into the bones and see that certain types of receptors are more predominant. In fact, the receptors are, so to even make it more fun, these receptors are all stimulated by different substances in different ways. And the receptors are stimulated in different ways. They can get upregulated or tonify the receptors, or they can downregulate or reduce activity in the receptors. So I'm going to give you a little bit of an example using cannabis. Which of these 2 receptors do you think THC stimulates? The brain, right? The CB1 receptors. THC works like a lock and key with those receptors. Now, there are tons of different cannabinoids in cannabis, and they all stimulate different receptors in different ways. So we pretty much obviously know the psychoactive one goes straight to the brain, whereas CBP and CBN, 2 other cannabinoids, go straight like a lock and key into the CB2 receptors. And then another very popular cannabinoid right now is CBD. It's in a lot of products names lately. And it, at least as we understand it now, works sort of indirectly with these 2 receptors. It's even been found when you have something that has some THC and CBD in it, the CBD reduces the stimulation abilities of the THC. So if you have high THC and no CBD, you'll have more stimulation in the brain. If you have a lot of CBD and a little THC, you'll have less stimulation in the brain. The CBD will down-regulate. So it gets complicated, right? Are you beginning to see how intricate and complex the system is? Okay. And because of this, it's really important to consider that individual diagnosis is absolutely necessary before we decide how we're going to stimulate this system. And this is something that Chinese medicine does really, really well. We do individual diagnosis and treatment, looking at where to tonify and where to reduce for each individual to create homeostasis. For example, someone might have both excess and deficiencies in various aspects of this network. And two main categories are now being talked about with this system. One is called clinical endocannabinoid deficiency, which is shortened for CED. And when we see deficiencies, we find things like migraines, irritable bowel syndrome, fibromyalgia. They've actually done studies now and are showing that people that have a predisposition to miscarrying have deficiencies in their cannabinoid systems. But then there's the other side of this, and there's people that have overactive endocannabinoid systems. And this presents different challenges like obesity, metabolic syndrome, hepatic fibrosis. So we really have to look at where to tonify and where to reduce to help balance the ECS. And those are the basics on the receptors. Then it's about how we stimulate these receptors. And I've broken this down into three categories for you. Exogenous cannabinoids like cannabis are also called phytocannabinoids. They're from plants. And cannabis is not the only is not the only plant that contains cannabinoids. There are many other plants that contain cannabinoids. Things like black pepper, rosemary, cloves, hops for you beer lovers out there, cinnamon, lemon balm, basil, oregano, lavender, I could go on. All of these have cannabinoids in them and therefore have medicinal properties if they're affecting the system, right? And cannabis is just the most popular for very good reason. In the different strains of cannabis, they have discovered at least 115 different cannabinoids. That's so many. Most of us maybe know, we know THC, right? We know CBD, but 115 different things in different strains affecting the system. So then there are the endogenous, the cannabinoids we make inside ourselves. There are several. I will not pronounce a lot of them. They're very long, complicated words, but 2-AG and AA, and then my other and my favorite is called anandamide. And I love this one because of the name. It's not only easy to produce or pronounce, it's also a beautiful word. Ananda in ancient yogic Sanskrit texts means bliss. So the scientists who discovered these cannabinoids literally define this as the bliss molecule. How cool is that? It's the molecule that I told you is more prevalent in the brain than any other substance that we produce that stimulates receptors in our brains. So we're literally wired to produce and receive bliss. What could be more beautiful than that? We make our own cannabinoids, our own cannabis, really. So exogenous, endogenous, and then the third one is, and this is your new favorite word. Anybody want to try and say it? Come on. Nice. Good. Nice. Cannabimimetic. And that literally just means cannabinoid-like or cannabis-like. So things that are not specifically cannabinoids that we make or that we get from plants, but still seem to affect the system. And research is finding out more and more about this category. It's kind of my favorite for a few different reasons that we're going to talk about today. But substances that are cannabimimetic are things like echinacea. And what do we... Lavender actually has cannabinoids in it and has cannabimimetics in it. Because lavender is a plant, it has a lot of different things in it, right? So, exactly. So we're learning that different parts of the lavender actually work like a lock and key in the system, and then other parts don't necessarily work like a lock and key, but still seem to be affecting the system. And the example that I just brought up is echinacea. What do we know about echinacea? What does it do?
Heal.
Right? What system does it work on? The immune system. What do we now know about the ECS and CB2 receptors? They stimulate the immune system. So we're now even learning, even about plants that we've used for a long time, oh, echinacea helps our immune system. Now we're understanding it on a whole new level of why that is. Echinacea is not alone. Black pepper, flax, black truffles, frankincense, liverwort, kava kava, maca, carrot. One of my favorite essential oils, helichrysum, which has amazing healing. Mushrooms are fascinating, different, and we could go on. So pretty much, and they're still figuring this stuff out. And things are moving around from this category up into this category as they figure out what parts of different plants are directly working with the system and which ones are indirectly working. So there's another category in the cannabimimetics I want to briefly talk about. Practices, things we do in our life. Who wants to share something that you do that you think might be cannabimimetic? I mean, I'll give you a guess.
Hold my dog.
You hold you. Good one. I mean, I'm a yoga teacher, an acupuncturist, a Chinese medicine doctor, so that gives you a hint to some of the things that I think are cannabimimetic, right? Meditation, yoga, acupuncture, herbal formulas to treat different things. All of this, if it is helping to create balance in the body, if it's addressing, helping get any part of my body into a healthier, more vital state, it's cannabimimetic. So you can start thinking time in nature, right? Walking down a beautiful path in the woods, breathing in the fresh pine. Guess what's in fresh pine? Terpenes. Guess what those terpenes are, right? So there's so many layers to this. Just sitting down and taking deep breaths can be cannabimimetic. Making love.
What about when someone uses pine cleaner
And
and you smell it
and what does that make you feel
and it
like?
creates a feeling?
It creates a feeling, right? So this is where we start crossing a bridge between the way modern science thinks of our systems and the way yoga and all of these ancient medical masters thought of our systems. There's really a bridge here because the ECS, maybe more than any other system, is alluding to the holistic aspect of our existence, right? Body, mind, and spirit. It makes you feel good. And as soon as we're in that state of feeling good, we're receptive, we're relaxed, we're open. These receptors light up and just start taking in the experience of that feeling. And they literally take it in, and then we start producing things that send messages throughout our body. The ECS offers a way for us to start discussing foundational Eastern concepts in terms that Western scholars, at least the ones that are educated in the ECS, may finally understand. It's truly a perfect time to start integrating our medicines, like looking at body, mind, and spirit medicine. And in Chinese medicine, we have different terminology, of course, right? Jing, Qi, and Shen. Most people have heard of Qi. Anybody heard of Jing? Anybody heard of Shen? So they're actually all on a continuum, much like body, mind, and spirit are. From the most condensed material aspect of our existence to the part that's sort of moving around, sending messages everywhere, to the most refined, subtle aspect of what we experience. Okay? And over time, these treasures got separated out. MDs and other physical medicine specialists now deal with the body. Psychologists and psychiatrists deal with the mind. And spirit pretty much has gotten removed from the medical equation altogether. However, in classical Chinese medicine, we never separated these things. We still don't. From our perspective, it's not even possible to separate these things. We would never look at any individual without looking at all of these because it's holistic. And this system is showing us how important that is. Chinese medicine, therefore, has been regulating this in all of our systems for thousands of years. We, of course, use different terminology than is used now. Not everything necessarily has a direct correlation. This is a big one, and I'm glad that we do have that. But as modern science evolves, we're starting to see more connections like this. We have a really deep history with cannabis and other cannabimetic herbs and practices. And Chinese medicine works with functions and dysfunctions now attributed to the ECS. And because of all this new science connected to the ECS, combined with these classical concepts that I'm talking about, the science is starting to validate all medical lineages that look at things so holistically. And no matter what field you are in or what type of healers you work with, we all now have an opportunity to advance in our practices because of this knowledge. And that's why I love working with healthcare professionals of all backgrounds. The ones that are starting to understand this system from wherever you look at it, the hardcore PhD immunological researchers to the MDs who are starting to practice as what they're now calling cannabinologists, to physical therapists, chiropractors, osteopaths, yoga teachers, on and on. When we all start coming to the table and looking at the new science, we're connecting so many dots. So, I do think for this reason, in order for us to go forward in medicine, it's also important that we start looking backward a little bit too. And that means we need to do a little more Doctor Who time traveling. You ready? Okay. All right, follow me. I promise not to lose you. If anybody starts getting lost, raise your hands. This is a quote from one of the most classical Chinese medical texts that exists. And like the ECS, this text alludes to the self-healing potential of our bodies. The Neijing was written about 3,500 years ago, and it discusses how their ancestors, even older than that, lived to be over 100 years, healthy and easily. So I'll read this to you. The ancient sages treated all disease through living a peaceful life in balance with nature. They moved and transformed the concentrated qi without herbs or needles. But humans became internally disturbed by over-attachment to emotions. Sense organs became externally vulnerable by overwork and loss of balance with nature. Our immune systems became weak. And in general, qi was no longer able to flow optimally. Organs, bones, and marrow could become more easily damaged, and then the old ways no longer worked. So then herbs and needles became necessary. That's a powerful statement if you really think about it, right? 3,500 years ago, they were talking about their ancestors living to over 100 years without needing any type of medicine, really. And how were they doing that? It sounds so simple. I mean, it's not so simple, is it, to live in balance with nature? And it wasn't simple 3,500 years ago. But this wisdom is there and real. So homeostasis, that's what they were just talking about, right? Living in balance with nature. So then our system came into balance. What's the ECS in charge of? Homeostasis, balance. Anybody starting to see a connection here? Yeah? The ancient sages knew how to live a cannabimetic lifestyle. They didn't need exogenous cannabinoids necessarily. I mean, I'm sure they were eating well, so in their diet they were probably getting what their system needed. But they didn't need to do it necessarily as medicine. They just ate what they knew was going to make their system vital. So let's remember these old ways. This is so important. Even while we use herbs and needles and drugs and surgeries to regain balance with nature and ultimately with ourselves. And in this regard, cannabis sativa has been a primary source of nutrition and medicine for a very long time. So let's cruise again, get into our spaceship and check out a few thousand years of history. Chinese medicine has done a phenomenal job of documenting and showing evidence of the use of cannabis for thousands of years. With THC, it's been used in many cultures to provide deepened states of meditation, give heightened awareness, bring purification, and drive out evil spirits. For the most part, use of this plant has also been censored out of Chinese medicine's education, just as it has Western medicine. So this is very sad, and a few of us scholars are out here changing that and making sure we bring back this wisdom and knowledge. It's in literally one of the foundational texts that every single Chinese medicine practitioner studies. It's called the Shenan Bensao Jing, and it considers cannabis a superior herb. So here's the interesting thing. How, if we literally have one of our main texts that every student of Chinese medicine studies calls cannabis a superior herb, did they manage to censor it out of our educations? Well, many scholars suggest this passage is referring to the use of hemp seeds. So I want to read you a very short citation from this text, and you tell me if you think they're talking about hemp seeds or the cannabis leaf. Taking much of it may make one behold ghosts, and prolonged taking may enable one to communicate with the spirit light and make the body feel light. Who thinks they're talking about hemp seeds? Cannabis flower? Right? I'm not sure why we're still debating this topic, but I could go into detail. I won't, but I'll leave it right there. The seeds, by the way, are also very powerful too. They've been used in Chinese medicine and around the world as nutrition source and medicinally for over 10,000 years. And they are talked about extensively in this same book, but very differently. When you see them talking about the cannabis seed, they're talking about totally different conditions and totally different results when they're being used. They're not talking about beholding ghosts and making the body light. So low and no THC strains have also been used for medical purposes, and Chinese medicine has extremely refined knowledge of how to use the different strains and parts of this and many plants for specific healing purposes. And my doctoral degree, I had to study these classical texts very intensively, and so that's where I had the opportunity to really dig up the evidence that, like I said, myself and a handful of other scholars are really looking into. So not only with cannabis, with all herbs, the wisdom that's reflected in Chinese medicine really comes out in the descriptions of how we formulate these herbs. We put them together. We rarely subscribe a single herb. And there's a bunch of important reasons for this, like Hua Tuo here, who combined not just cannabis, by the way, he used formulas in combination with acupuncture to perform surgeries. And when we formulate our herbs, we really have a better shot at creating homeostasis in the body for a few reasons. Formulas allow us to boost the effectiveness of individual herbs. We're able to address multiple issues at once, and we can counter potential side effects of certain herbs. So just because a plant's medicinal doesn't mean it doesn't also have toxic properties to it. But when we know how to take a medicinal herb that's potentially toxic, treat it, and then combine it with other herbs, we can make it medicinal and not toxic. And again, this is an area where modern science can really learn from the ancient sciences. So now we're going to jump ahead in time and cruise through a shorter span in history to look at how modern science era's understanding of this plant and system has evolved. And we're going to start back in 1895. A lot of people don't know this, but it was in 1895 that they first found the first cannabinoid in cannabis. It took over 30 years before they were able, even with that one cannabinoid that they found, to identify its particular structure. And they were already starting to realize that CBN had anticonvulsant and anti-inflammatory properties. They didn't understand why or how it was doing this. But now, like I've told you, we have how many? 115 plus cannabinoids. In 35 years, they only figured out one. And then it took another 10 years to find the second one, CBD. Then we have to jump another couple dozen years before they find THC and are able to say, oh, this is the part that has the psychoactive effect in the plant. So this is not that long ago that we figured this out. And then we still have to jump up here a couple dozen more years before the big discovery happened. They found the receptors in our bodies, right? And that is when science really took off. And look how just a couple years later, they found that we make things that directly stimulate these receptors. It's at that point that the discovery of the ECS happens, right? When we realize we have a fully endogenous system that gets stimulated by things we make and specific receptors. This blew open the door for research, and that was only in 1992. So this is how new this science is, but since 1992, the research has gone gangbusters. However, would anyone like to take a guess as to why studies and knowledge of the ECS have not gone mainstream yet? Despite how significant the system is, why don't most people still know about it?
Bad PR.
Bad PR because of its relationship
To RX medicine.
to what?
Pharmaceutical.
Okay, so the pharmaceutical industry has something to do with it. But what's the other reason that it might get bad PR?
You have to smoke pot to get it.
The smoking part?
Right. Well, and we've just learned this system, that baby duck didn't need cannabis, right? So this system, we need to understand it with regards to, but regardless of cannabis. That's really important. But because of this relationship with cannabis, right? We found it through understanding cannabis. Now, every time and everywhere I go, people still say, oh, Heather's here to give a talk on cannabis. But already just halfway through our lecture, am I here I'm talking about cannabis, but what's my big message to you guys? The endocannabinoid system, right? So let's look at this because it's important. If any of you go away from here, this is one message I really want you to understand. I absolutely am a proponent of studying, using, and understanding cannabis as medicine, but I want us to understand this system regardless of that plant, and for sure go out and help change this negative stigma that we know is out there, the bad PR, right? We're the new social stigma, exactly. We're the new PR directors, right? So the information you guys are learning is going to help us turn history, and it is so important. Knowing how big of a deal this system is, right? That's why I'm up here as an educator, to make sure we do this. So for that, here's another time travel line let's look at. I mean, we were back here 4,000 years ago looking at cannabis a few slides ago. It was used in the West for a long time too, but then actually in 1906 is when pharmaceutical regulation began in the United States, and Big Pharma started evolving. As soon as scientists discovered the therapeutic potentials in cannabis, and who remembers those years? When did we start figuring out there were receptors and everything? Not that long ago, right? 1988, 1992. When did we start looking at the cannabis plant though? In the 30s and 40s. We were really starting to go, hey, this plant's got something, right? Well, geez, look at that. Is there a connection there? Right? As soon as we start figuring out cannabis has these properties that are slowing down convulsions, seizures, reducing inflammation, it becomes illegal at the same exact time. That's kind of ironic, at least, right? So, and this literally means they scheduled it a class 1 drug, yeah?
The alcohol industry.
Another good point. And that's part of the Food and Drug, the big pharma, the lobbyists, exactly. So as the science is just starting to evolve, we're just starting to see this huge system through studying cannabis. At the same exact time, the government makes it a class 1 drug, which literally is supposed to mean it has no medicinal value. How does that make any sense? Still, this is a frustration of most people who are advocating not just for the recreational use of this plant, but more importantly, for the scientific study of it, for the understanding of how this plant and substances in it, A, led to the discovery of this system, and B, to all of the amazing healing potentials. Ironically, though, since the plant was criminalized, China and the US governments have filed more medical patents on the components of the cannabis plant than any other entity in the world. And they ensured control of all the initial research in their countries. So even during modern era cannabis prohibition, the government has explored many cannabinoid-based pharmaceutical targets for the ECS. Things like reducing chemotherapy-induced vomiting, reducing spasticity during multiple sclerosis, treating cancer-related pain, reducing childhood seizures, and of course, the one that they thought they'd make tons of money off of, and may still, are anti-obesity drugs. So this has been happening while it's been illegal.
I thought I read something about use for dementia.
Oh, yes. I mean, I'm not giving you an exhaustive list. There's a long list there, and we're going to talk about a little bit about the research, but you're absolutely right. So what I can say right now, and that you all can go out into the world and say, is cannabis is the gift nature gave us that led to discovering this system. It is still one of the best ways to study it, but only privately or state-funded research using cannabis is possible in these few little areas, the blue zones, where it's legal. The federal bureaucracies, along with influence from pharmaceutical and other drug war industries and alcohol, right, things like some of you guys mentioned, they've effectively prohibited studies not only around cannabis, but ultimately suppressing knowledge and advances in studies about the ECS as well. So that leaves us in a system that is a little bit challenged right now for political, legal, lots of different reasons that we just started to tap into. Today, many patients have more training on the ECS than their own doctors. And whether you're a medical professional or not in the audience today, you're now among a pretty elite crowd, knowing more than a lot of medical professionals do. And this absolutely has to change. All healthcare practitioners are treating conditions connected to the ECS. Most just aren't aware that they're doing so. More patients are asking their physicians about, or at least reporting their use of cannabis for various purposes, yet few patients or their physicians understand why and how this plant may be helping or harming them. This has to change, right? It's like wanting to understand and use opioids to treat pain, but not figuring out the nervous system, not understanding the nervous system, or not even understanding what an opiate receptor is. On that note, by the way, understanding the ECS is going to play a key role in solving the opioid crisis. That's my prediction. It's already starting, and 10 years from now you'll be like, hey, I went to a lecture where she talked about this, and we're going to figure out how to treat, because guess what? The endocannabinoid system is regulating the opioid receptors. So instead of hard targeting with addictive substances, these receptors that create an addictive response, if we target the endocannabinoid system, it's a whole different experience. There's a lot of research starting out there on that you can check out too. So my big question, and the question I hope you guys go out and ask, is why are schools not embracing this science and teaching the motherboard system of systems? Right? It's not fringe science anymore, guys, and that's really important. And even though, so this survey, by the way, is taken in 2014. I hope things have changed a little bit. I'm not optimistic that this number has changed significantly, but that's why I'm out here on the road and why you guys have an important role to play. So not fringe science. Has anybody heard of PubMed or Google Scholar? If you're a research geek like me, these are the places we go with any question we have, and you type in your topic and it'll bring up how much research has been done, every single research thing. So the other day I typed in endocannabinoids, and look how fast it gave me 35,600 results that had that word in it. That's a lot of research and a lot of science. If you typed this same word in back in 1993, you would have gotten 48 instead of 35,000. If you typed in cannabinoid back in 1993, you might have gotten 3,000 or 4,000 because they'd been studying cannabis. But now you'd get 50 or 60,000. So this is just a short list that I threw up there on the endocannabinoid system of a few of the topics that are covered. And my doctoral thesis had about 5 pages of resourced sources and another 8 pages of sources that I additionally referenced. I have read hundreds, if not at least 1,000 publications on this topic, and you all have already mentioned a few things we won't be able to cover today, all of this great research, but let's look at some of the key functions that this research is starting to connect to the ECS. So this is the big question. What functions does the ECS modulate? And the list is pretty extensive, right? We've talked about immunity. Emotional memory is regulated by the ECS. Hunger is regulated by the ECS. Metabolism. Reproduction and fertility, I do a whole lecture on reproduction and fertility with this topic. Pain and inflammation, which we'll briefly touch on today, because I think that's something we can all relate to, and most of you have probably heard about some of the research that's been involved with cancer treatments, right? And I could go on and on and on, but that kind of starts showing you what a big deal the ECS is in modulating things. So pain and inflammation, these two events go hand in hand and are underlying factors in a lot of diseases. This is, again, not an extensive list, but gives you an idea. Inflammation is an immunological response to trauma, and pain is a neurological response to trauma. Endocannabinoids regulate both immunological and neurological responses. Immune cells actually generate and secrete endocannabinoids, and the purpose of that is to influence the process of tissue inflammation. And the ECS is a very key part of the nervous system's regulation of pain sensation at every stage. So with such major roles in our immune and neurological systems, can you see how the ECS is playing a key role in just about any disease that includes pain and inflammation, right? This could revolutionize pain management. I don't make a statement like that lightly. How many clinics, how many pain management clinics are in the country right now? And then the big question is, how many of them are treating with a good, solid understanding of what we know now to be the ECS? This is so key, especially with all of the addiction issues we have with pain management treatment right now. I wish we could go back in time and take what we know now and avoid the opioid crisis, but at least we now finally have some really groundbreaking research to move us in that direction. So I only could pick one study to share with you guys today out of, 36,000? And this is the study I thought I would share because it's a good one for you to take out and use as a conversation starter. Who has heard of the runner's high? Who has experienced a runner's high in your life? Vigorous exercise kind of high. Nice, good. Associated with reduction in anxiety, reduced pain, a feeling of euphoria, sense of relaxation. Well, who knows the substance that creates the runner's high? Anyone want to take a guess? What would your doctor say? Endorphins. Is that what everybody else was going to say? Yeah?
Is that a substance?
Endorphins? Endorphins are a substance, absolutely. We produce endorphins in our body, and pretty much any doctor that you went out and asked would say endorphins are what we produce at that moment where we get that runner's high and sense of euphoria. Well,
A lot of different things can give that to you, right?
No, actually, and that's what we're going to talk about right now. That's a great thought. Like, can multiple things give us a runner's high? Something else might give us.
Painting give that to you?
Can what?
Painting.
Oh, sorry, that's not a substance. That's an activity. Got you. Yeah. So yes, not just runner. I mean, it's called a runner's high, but we can get that high through different activities. Absolutely. So it's not just running. Good point. Yet it got named this, right? We all kind of are familiar with this term. So a study has shown that when the researchers blocked the animal's response to endorphins, the mice still got the runner's high. But what do you think happened when they blocked the ECS?
Nothing.
Ain't got no high. So who still thinks endorphins cause the runner's high? I hear crickets, or at least chirping puppies. This study suggests that endorphins do not contribute to the runner's high, but cannabinoids do. The data also showed that cannabinoids, not endorphins or any other substance, play a role in the pain relief associated with the runner's high. So what does that make running? What's one of our new favorite words? Running is? Yeah, running is cannabimimetic, right? Awesome. What else could we learn? Just imagine when we start looking at things so holistically. through this system. And that's really what's important now. How do we begin to care for ourselves with this new understanding? And that's what's happening, both in research and in our practices. We are really seeing this take off. So it's not just running, meditation, yoga, deep breathing. And so far the research says these things impart a mild cannabinoid effect. Do you think that maybe it could be less than mild? Yes, right? We need to do more of these things. The only reason the research is not showing greater results is because how much is meditation become a part of our daily lives? How many people are living in balance with nature? That's what we need to look at, living cannabinoid lifestyles. Once we're doing this, we see a cascade of physiological events occur that helps us get to that state of homeostasis. So, quick question. Do we all need the same things? Is this a one-size-fits-all medicine? Quick quiz question. No way, right? Each of us needs to tonify and reduce differently to find balance. That's really important when we talk about especially using cannabis in any medical way, right? We don't all need the same thing. That's so important to understand. Or all of the great, some are great, some are not, products that are now out there being marketed for CBD products and things like that, right? Do we all need the same thing? No. And we got to be careful. Now that we start having this understanding, what we start throwing into our systems, I'm really hoping this is going to help change this part of medicine and individualize things. And this is something that Chinese medicine is so beautiful with. We individualize our diagnosis and treatments. And I see unbelievable results when I use the medicines that I know and practice combined with all of the new research. These are the gems that I want to uncover with you guys, this kind of awareness that's starting to bridge time and science, because it's this integration that's really going to take science and healing to a whole new level. Science is proving that we have to acknowledge the less tangible aspects of our physiology. Thankfully, more people than ever before are seeking and practicing integrative healthcare. My mission, right, integrating, we need to start thinking like this. My mission is to reestablish Chinese medicine's role with cannabis and other cannabinoid herbs, to show that Chinese medicine and yoga address body, mind, spirit, and all sciences and all of these things, and that for sure all sciences can benefit by integrating mind, body, spirit practices. And for sure, an awareness that being connected to nature's rhythms is critical for our health and the future of health for all life on this planet. For decades, for many decades, few of us knew about the wisdom of ancient Eastern medicines, and none of us knew about the endocannabinoid system. Yet today, we can see some pretty strong connections between these times and systems that can radically improve healthcare in every single patient and practitioner in the world. And that is why I'm here with you today. I hope that I've at least sparked something in you that will have you start joining me in sending this message out wherever you go from here today, whether you're talking to your doctors, if you're involved in any way with any type of education system or healthcare system. Today, what you took and what you can take back there will literally be the ripple effects that change the way that this is being handled politically, academically, and in our sciences and our healthcare. And I want to help you, so please let me know how I can help you. I want to hear from everybody about how you're doing this and in what ways that I can support those efforts. You guys are my new cheerleaders for what I call the cannabinoid revolution. Say that 3 times really fast. And talking about our true healing potential. And remember, with or without cannabis. That's really important. So does anybody want to share with me any big takeaway that you learned? And then we're going to go into questions. Is there a big aha moment with this? Yes.
Just Oh, there's so much resistance out there. There's so much stigma. And there's so much acceptance and tolerance of alcohol.
Yeah.
Which is so much more aggressive.
Yeah, when you see the dissonance, right? This really shows it to you, like, wow, this is revolutionary science, and yet we have this type of resistance. That's a really big, I mean, I come face to face with that in little and big ways every day in my profession, and certainly in our personal lives. And that's why I'm glad you bring it up, and why we need to keep pushing for that to change.
And, there was a day, it was on the front page of the newspaper, when Snowmass, the town of Snowmass, announced they would not allow any cannabis shops there. And the very same evening, a restaurant manager threw back several shots, and got in his car and ran over a woman.
Yeah.
The same day.
Yeah, we really have a long way to go. Yes, Bill.
Sorry, that's what, it just struck him.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Like, just the resistance.
I find it interesting that you pointed out that there's over 36,000 studies. When you do a search right now, just a basic Google search on the cannabinoid system, endocannabinoid system, sorry.
Yeah.
The point I'm trying to make, though, is if there's over 36,000 or 36,000 studies now, what do you use as what you see as reliable information you can count on? What you showed and you pointed out the places you go to. What can you lead us to, places to go to get reliable information?
Oh, it's a good point, and I was remiss in telling you, first of all, that you can come to me and my website. From a lot of different perspectives. I am not only supporting patients, but I'm now consulting healthcare practitioners, dispensary owners, people who work in the cannabis industry. I do a lot of consulting now. That's different than medical diagnosis and treatment because of legal reasons. Still, federally, that's tricky. But the educational part of this, I'm probably one of your best sources. Especially if you're not someone who is proficient in shifting through thousands of things, 36,000
Sure, and as a
topics.
follow-up, I appreciate this. Often I find that I'm going to different unknown sources for information. I don't know that this information is good or bad. And so
Right.
what do you use to define whether or not it's good or bad information? How do you determine?
Absolutely. Well, going to medical school and being able to learn how to evaluate the validity of research is really important, right?
Yeah.
So I can cruise through research and look at a million different factors who funded this research. Gives you a big, big tip. And what did we talk about? What's really challenging right now? How do you get this research funded if it involves cannabis? It has to be privately funded. So those are things that are really tricky right now. It's a great question, Bill, and it's not an easy question to answer. So you really want to be very careful when you do go out there and look for resources. Because one thing you will find is a whole lot of people wanting to tell you that they know what to do right now. People send me stuff all the time, right? Now that I'm out here on the road, I mean, every time anything comes out about CBD or cannabis or a new research thing, everybody sends it to me. And I appreciate that. And at the same time, I literally end up finding errors in about 90% of what is sent to me. If it makes it into the mainstream right now, there's usually a monetary motivation behind it, and there is inaccuracy in a lot of the statements. And in defense of a lot of people putting out information, it's changing all the time right now. Science is moving so fast. So you really want to make sure you're working with someone who's staying up to date on the research. And my specialty, again, remember, I am a specialist in the old ways, right? In all of these old practices. But I am also an integrative practitioner, and proudly say that because I truly believe that the best way for me to use and practice these old ways is to make sure I have a really good grounding and understanding of the most recent and credible science out there. So that, I think, are the kind of people you really want to find. I'm getting ready to I actually have a book written. If anybody knows a great finishing editor, I'm in need and ready. And then there's going to be some online courses following that book. And I'm going to write courses both for healthcare practitioners and for people working in the cannabis industry separately. And you can always, again, go to my website and reach out for consultations. So here's my email address, and hopefully you guys will have all of this information. My business cards will be out, and you have some evaluation forms to fill out. And I want to see right now if there are any other big questions, mostly if any of you think that something that didn't get covered that you really wished would have gotten covered, or did I trigger something that's like, oh my gosh, you made me think of this and I absolutely right now would need this information. Otherwise, I hope you'll get in touch with me after our talk and continue our discussion and dialogue through our consultations. I put this slide up right before we ask questions just to remind you that everything I do is nonprofit driven. I have a scholarship foundation. Right now, I provide scholarships to students of Chinese medicine all over the country. It's the only nonprofit in the country giving students of Chinese medicine scholarships. And very soon, we're going to start offering continuing education to all healthcare practitioners in a nonprofit structure. So as an educator and practitioner, this is the organization I'm supporting, so I appreciate your support. And this is my last little slide as we take questions, because I just want you to remember the most important cannabinoid of them all. Love, right? Yeah. Thank you. And in all seriousness, did this talk raise any questions you want me to answer right now? No? Do you feel like you guys all could give a definition of the endocannabinoid system?
No.
No?
Endocannabinoids is a tough word.
It's
You
such-
got ECS, which is okay.
It's, I didn't get to name the system, and I would have named it something different. It's,
That system,
it's,
I mean, the ECS is the system, but there's this other entity, cannabinoids. What?
right, it's a good question, and like I really want to make sure by the end of this talk, if anything, there's a simple grasp of the endocannabinoid system and cannabimimetics. So really, and that's part of why I took the word endocannabinoid system out of my title, and I called it the self-healing system, is because of this. I mean, I wish I could rename the system. Because it literally, the brain just almost shuts down with the complicated word.
You might want to just rename it.
I think you should rename it.
I want to rename it.